A 1904 studio photo looks harmless, but the girl's hands reveal a frightening detail. Professor David Richardson carefully arranged the collection of vintage photographs on his desk at the Boston Historical Archive, each one a window into America's past. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of his office, casting golden light across the sepia-toned images that had arrived that morning from the Pemberton estate sale. Among dozens of typical family portraits from the early 1900s, one photograph immediately caught his attention. Not for any obvious reason, but for its seeming perfection. The 1904 studio portrait showed a young girl, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, seated in an ornate Victorian chair against a painted backdrop of pastoral scenery. She wore a pristine white dress with delicate lace trim, her dark hair arranged in the elaborate ringlets fashionable for children of wealthy families. Her expression was serene, almost angelic, with large dark eyes that seemed to gaze directly at the viewer with unsettling intensity. Everything about the photograph screamed privilege and innocence, from the expensive fabric of her dress to the professional quality of the studio work. The photographer had clearly been skilled, capturing every detail with remarkable clarity despite the limitations of early 20th century equipment. The girl's pose was perfectly composed, her back straight, her feet positioned precisely on the small velvet stool beneath the chair. Another donation from the Pemberton collection, his research assistant Maria had noted, placing the photograph among the others. The family made their fortune in textile manufacturing. This appears to be their daughter, Adelaide, based on the inscription on the back. David turned the photograph over and read the faded writing in brown ink. Adelaide Pemberton, age 12, October 15th, 1904. Our precious angel. The handwriting was feminine, probably that of a devoted mother documenting a moment in her daughter's childhood. The date placed the photograph during the height of the Progressive Era, when wealthy families often commissioned elaborate portraits to document their children's growth and accomplishments. As David began cataloging the image for the archive's database, something about the girl's positioning nagged at him. While her face displayed perfect composure and her posture was flawless, there was something about the way her hands rested in her lap that seemed slightly unnatural. The positioning appeared deliberate, almost studied, as if she had been very carefully instructed on exactly how to place them. Most children in formal portraits from this era looked stiff and uncomfortable, clearly struggling to maintain the required pose for the long exposure times. But Adelaide appeared completely at ease, as if sitting perfectly still for extended periods was natural to her. There was something unsettling about such composure in someone so young. David reached for his professional magnifying glass, the same tool he had used for 15 years of archival work to examine thousands of historical photographs for signs of damage, alteration, or hidden details that might provide insight into the subjects' lives. As he positioned the lens over Adelaide's hands, he adjusted his desk lamp to eliminate any shadows that might obscure important details. The girl's hands were folded neatly in her lap, fingers interlaced in a pose that initially appeared perfectly normal for a formal portrait of the era. Her white cotton gloves, appropriate for a girl of her social standing, covered her hands completely, as was proper for young ladies during photo sessions. The gloves themselves appeared to be of excellent quality, with delicate pearl buttons at the wrists and fine stitching that spoke of expensive craftsmanship. However, as David studied the image more closely, he noticed something peculiar about the way the gloves fit. While the right glove appeared smooth and properly fitted, the left glove seemed to have an unusual bulkiness around the palm and fingers, as if something beneath was causing the fabric to strain slightly. The distortion was so subtle that it would be completely invisible to casual observation, but under magnification, it became unmistakable. "That's odd," David murmured to himself, adjusting the focus of his magnifying glass. He had examined countless photographs of Victorian-era children, and their clothing was typically impeccably fitted, especially for formal portraits where appearance was paramount. The Pemberton family's wealth would have ensured that Adelaide's entire outfit, including her gloves, was perfectly tailored for the occasion. David reached for his digital camera equipped with macro lenses, specifically designed for detailed archival photography. As he photographed the image at high resolution, focusing particularly on the girl's hands, he began to notice other subtle details that hadn't been visible during his initial examination. The left glove not only appeared bulky, but also seemed to have faint discoloration near the wrist area, darker spots that could have been stains of some kind. The staining pattern was irregular and appeared to have been present when the photograph was taken, rather than being the result of age or deterioration over the past century. David had seen similar staining on historical garments that had been exposed to various substances, but determining the exact nature of the stains from a photograph would require additional investigation. As he continued his examination, David noticed that Adelaide's expression, while appearing serene at first glance, had a quality that made him increasingly uncomfortable. Her smile seemed forced, and her eyes held a coldness that was disturbing in someone so young. There was something calculating about her gaze, as if she was very aware of the secrets that the camera couldn't capture. Unable to shake his unease about the photograph, David decided to research the Pemberton family and their daughter, Adelaide. The Historical Archive's extensive genealogy collection included detailed records of many prominent Boston families from the early 1900s, and the Pembertons' wealth and social status meant they would likely be well documented in newspaper society pages and public records. David's initial research confirmed what he had suspected about the family's prominence. Harrison Pemberton had built a textile empire that employed hundreds of workers in factories throughout New England. The family lived in a mansion on Beacon Hill and was actively involved in Boston's social and cultural life. Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton was known for her charity work and frequently hosted elaborate parties for the city's elite. Adelaide was their only child, born in 1892, which made her 12 years old at the time of the photograph, consistent with the inscription. However, as David delved deeper into newspaper archives, he began to find disturbing reports from the period surrounding the photograph's date. The Boston Globe from October 1904 contained several articles about a series of mysterious accidents and deaths that had occurred in the Pemberton household's social circle. "Maria, look at this." David called his assistant over to his desk, where he had spread out photocopies of newspaper clippings. 3 separate incidents involving the Pemberton family's acquaintance, all within 6 months of when this photograph was taken. The first incident involved the family's previous governess, Miss Catherine Walsh, who had died in September 1904 after falling down the stairs in the Pemberton mansion. The newspaper reported it as a tragic accident, noting that Miss Walsh had been with the family for 2 years and was considered part of their household. The second incident occurred in November 1904, when a neighbor's dog was found dead in the Pembertons' garden under mysterious circumstances. The third was the death of a young servant named Thomas, who had worked in the Pemberton stables and was found drowned in the Charles River in December 1904. 3 deaths in 4 months, all connected to the same family, Maria observed, studying the newspaper clippings. That seems like an unusual string of accidents, even for that era when workplace safety and medical care were much less advanced than today. David nodded grimly. And look at the dates. The governess died just 3 weeks before Adelaide's portrait was taken. If this photograph was taken on October 15th, as inscribed, then Miss Walsh had died on September 24th. Adelaide would have been deeply affected by losing her governess so close to the photo session. The newspaper account of Miss Walsh's death was brief but troubling. According to the report, she had been found at the bottom of the main staircase early in the morning by other household staff. The article noted that she had been in good health and had no known reason for being on the stairs at that hour, as her bedroom was on the same floor as Adelaide's nursery and schoolroom. David's investigation into Miss Catherine Walsh's death led him to the Boston Public Library's newspaper archives, where he spent hours scrolling through microfilm records from the autumn of 1904. What he discovered painted a troubling picture of a young woman whose life had ended under circumstances that, while officially ruled accidental, contained several disturbing inconsistencies. Catherine Walsh had been 23 years old when she died. A well-educated young woman from a respectable middle-class family who had been employed as Adelaide's governess for nearly 2 years. According to the society pages, she had been highly regarded by the Pemberton family and had been instrumental in Adelaide's education, teaching her literature, music, and the social graces expected of a girl from her elevated social position. However, David discovered that in the weeks before her death, Miss Walsh had written several letters to her sister in New York expressing concern about her position with the Pembertons. These letters, which had been preserved in the family's papers and later donated to the Historical Society, revealed that Catherine had become increasingly uncomfortable with Adelaide's behavior and had requested a meeting with Mrs. Pemberton to discuss her concerns. "Adelaide has become quite willful and difficult to manage," Catherine had written in a letter dated September 10th, 1904, just 2 weeks before her death. "She seems to take pleasure in defying my instructions, and has begun displaying behaviors that are most concerning for a child of her age and breeding. I have attempted to discuss these matters with Mrs. Pemberton, but she seems unwilling to acknowledge that Adelaide's conduct requires correction." In another letter, dated September 18th, Catherine described a specific incident that had alarmed her. "Yesterday, Adelaide deliberately broke her mother's favorite vase, and then calmly blamed the accident on one of the maids. When I informed her that lying was unacceptable, she looked at me with such coldness that I felt genuinely frightened. There is something in that child's eyes that suggests she is capable of far worse than mere mischief." The final letter Catherine had written to her sister was dated September 22nd, just 2 days before her death. In it, she expressed her intention to give notice and leave the Pemberton household as soon as possible. "I can no longer remain in this position," she wrote. "Adelaide has threatened me in ways that I dare not put into writing, and I fear for my safety if I continue to oppose her will. I plan to speak with Mr. Pemberton tomorrow about my immediate resignation." David felt a chill as he read these words, realizing that Catherine Walsh had died before she could have that crucial conversation with her employer. The timing suggested that Adelaide might have somehow learned of her governess's plans to leave and taken action to prevent her from carrying out those intentions. David's examination of the high-resolution photographs he had taken revealed details that were invisible to the naked eye but became startlingly clear under extreme magnification. The discoloration on Adelaide's left glove was not random staining from age or photographic chemicals. It appeared to be a specific pattern that suggested the presence of organic material that had seeped through the fabric. Using specialized software designed for forensic photograph analysis, David was able to enhance the contrast and clarity of the stained areas. What emerged was a pattern consistent with blood staining. Not fresh blood, which would have appeared dark in the black and white photograph, but blood that had been partially cleaned and had left residual staining that showed up as lighter discoloration against the white fabric of the glove. "This is incredible," David told Maria as they examined the enhanced images on his computer screen. "Look at the pattern of staining around the palm and fingers. It's consistent with someone who had blood on their hands and then put on gloves over the residual stains." The bulkiness David had noticed in Adelaide's left glove now took on sinister significance. Under extreme magnification, the distortion appeared to be caused by bandaging or wrapping underneath the glove, suggesting that Adelaide had sustained injuries to her hand that she was concealing during the photograph session. David cross-referenced the photograph's date with the timeline of Catherine Walsh's death and made a chilling discovery. The photograph had been taken on October 15, 1904, exactly 3 weeks after the governess's fatal fall down the stairs. If Adelaide had been involved in Catherine's death, she would have had just enough time for minor injuries to begin healing while still requiring concealment. "But how could a 12-year-old girl overpower a grown woman?" Maria asked as they discussed their findings. David had been considering the same question and had developed a theory based on the physical evidence and the layout of the Pemberton mansion, which he had researched through architectural records. Catherine was found at the bottom of the main staircase, which was a grand curved staircase with marble steps. If someone pushed her from the top, or even just caused her to lose her balance at the right moment, the fall would certainly be fatal. The newspaper reports had noted that Catherine was found early in the morning, suggesting she had fallen during the night when the household was asleep. This timing would have provided an opportunity for someone who knew the house's layout and routines to approach her without being detected by other family members or servants. David's research revealed that Adelaide's bedroom was located at the top of the main staircase, giving her both opportunity and access. If Catherine had confronted Adelaide about her planned resignation, or if Adelaide had discovered her governess's intentions through other means, the girl would have had both motive and opportunity to act. As David delved deeper into the Pemberton family's history, a disturbing pattern began to emerge that extended beyond Catherine Walsh's death. His research revealed that Adelaide had been associated with a series of accidents and mysterious incidents dating back to her early childhood, suggesting that her capacity for violence had developed gradually over several years. When Adelaide was 8 years old, the family's previous governess, Miss Emily Richardson, had left her position abruptly after what the family described as a misunderstanding. David found a letter Miss Richardson had written to the employment agency that had placed her with the Pembertons, warning them that Adelaide was a child of unusual and disturbing temperament who should not be left alone with animals or smaller children. The letter, preserved in the agency's files and later donated to the Historical Society, described several incidents that had concerned Miss Richardson. Adelaide had been found torturing insects and small animals, displaying what the governess described as an alarming lack of empathy and an apparent enjoyment of others' suffering. When confronted about these behaviors, Adelaide had shown no remorse and had instead threatened Miss Richardson with unspecified consequences if she reported her actions to her parents. David also discovered records of Adelaide's interactions with other children during social gatherings at the Pemberton mansion. Several society mothers had quietly stopped bringing their children to the Pembertons' parties after incidents where Adelaide had accidentally hurt other children during games. These incidents were always explained away as normal childhood roughness, but the pattern suggested deliberate violence disguised as play. The death of the neighbor's dog, which had occurred just weeks after Catherine Walsh's demise, now took on new significance in light of Adelaide's history of animal cruelty. The dog had been found in the Pembertons' garden with signs of poisoning, though no source of the poison was ever identified. Given Adelaide's documented history of harming animals, this incident fit perfectly into the pattern of escalating violence. She was practicing, David told Maria as they reviewed the evidence they had compiled. First insects and small animals, then larger animals, then humans. It's a classic progression that we see in criminal psychology, even today. The servant Thomas's drowning in December 1904 also appeared less accidental when viewed in this context. Thomas had been employed in the Pemberton stables and had been known for his kindness to animals. If he had discovered evidence of Adelaide's cruelty to horses or stable cats, he might have confronted her or threatened to report her behavior to her parents, giving her motive to eliminate him as she had eliminated Catherine Walsh. David found records indicating that Thomas's body had been discovered with unexplained bruises that were inconsistent with drowning alone, suggesting he had been struck or pushed before entering the water. The location where he was found was near a bridge that Adelaide would have known well, as the family often walked in that area during their leisure time. David's investigation revealed that the Pemberton parents had been either willfully blind to their daughter's dangerous behavior, or had actively participated in covering up her crimes to protect the family's reputation. Harrison and Eleanor Pemberton were pillars of Boston society, and any scandal involving their only child would have been devastating to their social standing and business interests. The family's wealth and influence had clearly been used to suppress any serious investigation into the suspicious deaths surrounding Adelaide. David found evidence that Harrison Pemberton had made substantial donations to various civic organizations immediately after each incident, including generous contributions to the Police Benevolent Fund and the Coroner's Office operating budget. Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton's diary, which had been preserved in the family papers, contained entries that suggested she was aware of Adelaide's true nature, but was determined to conceal it from society. Adelaide requires careful management, she had written in September 1904, around the time of Catherine Walsh's death. We must ensure that her special nature is channeled appropriately and that outsiders do not misunderstand her unique temperament. Another entry from November 1904 was even more revealing. The girl's governess was unsuitable and had to be replaced. Adelaide is happier now that she has more freedom to express herself. We must be more careful in our selection of household staff to ensure they understand Adelaide's particular needs and do not attempt to suppress her natural inclinations. David realized that the formal portrait taken in October 1904 had been deliberately commissioned to create an image of Adelaide as an innocent, well-adjusted child, a public relations exercise designed to counter any whispers or suspicions that might have been circulating in Boston society. The photograph was meant to be evidence of the family's normalcy and Adelaide's proper upbringing. The choice of costume and setting for the photograph had been carefully calculated to project maximum innocence. The white dress symbolized purity, the elaborate studio setting suggested wealth and respectability, and Adelaide's serene expression was intended to show her as a perfectly normal, well-behaved child from a loving family. However, Adelaide's insistence on wearing gloves during the photo session, despite the fact that most children's portraits of the era showed bare hands, suggested that she was actively concealing evidence of her recent activities. The photographer would have been told that the gloves were a fashion choice or a personal preference, not suspecting their true purpose. David's analysis of the photograph's composition revealed that Adelaide had been given significant input into how she was positioned and presented. The careful arrangement of her hands, the calculated expression, and the overall staging showed a level of control that was unusual for a child subject, suggesting that Adelaide herself had been orchestrating her public image even at the age of 12. David's research led him to the business records of Hartwell Studio, the prestigious Boston photography establishment that had taken Adelaide's portrait. The studio had catered to wealthy families throughout the early 1900s, and had kept detailed records of their sessions, including notes about their subjects' behavior and any special requirements for the shoots. The photographer's notes for Adelaide's October 15, 1904 session provided chilling insight into the girl's demeanor during what should have been a routine portrait sitting. The subject displayed unusual composure and control for a child, the photographer had written. Insisted on wearing gloves despite recommendation that children's hands photograph better when uncovered. Subject seemed to direct her own posing and showed remarkable patience during long exposures. Awesom's more disturbing was the photographer's personal account, which David found in a journal that had been donated to the Boston Photography Historical Society. The Pemberton child unnerved me greatly, the photographer had written. While she maintained perfect stillness during the lengthy exposures, I had the distinct impression that she was studying me throughout the session, as if evaluating whether I posed any threat to her or her family. There was an adult intelligence behind those young eyes that was deeply unsettling. The photographer had also noted that Adelaide had shown unusual interest in the chemicals and processes used in developing photographs, asking detailed questions about how images were captured and whether they could reveal details that weren't visible to the naked eye during the actual session. The child seemed particularly concerned about whether photographic plates could record information that might not be apparent in the moment, he had written. David realized that Adelaide had been worried about what the photograph might reveal about her recent activities. Her questions about the photographic process showed a sophisticated understanding that images could preserve evidence that might later be examined by people who knew what to look for. Her insistence on wearing gloves had been a calculated attempt to conceal evidence, but she hadn't realized that the bloodstaining and hand injuries would still be detectable through enhanced analysis more than a century later. The photographer's notes also revealed that the Pemberton parents had been unusually specific about how Adelaide should be presented in the portrait. They had requested that she appear angelic and innocent, and had brought multiple costume options to ensure the most favorable impression. The white dress had been specifically chosen for its symbolic value, and the entire session had been designed to create documentation of Adelaide's supposed purity and normalcy. However, the photographer had noticed that Adelaide's parents seemed nervous during the session, frequently exchanging glances and whispering among themselves, as if they were concerned about something beyond the normal anxiety of parents wanting a perfect portrait of their child. David's investigation culminated when he discovered Catherine Walsh's personal effects, which had been returned to her family after her death and eventually donated to a historical society in New York. Among these belongings was a diary that Catherine had kept during her employment with the Pembertons, providing a first-hand account of Adelaide's escalating behavior in the weeks leading up to the governess's death. Catherine's final entries painted a terrifying picture of a child who had learned to manipulate adults while concealing a capacity for calculated violence. Adelaide has become increasingly bold in her threats, Catherine had written just days before her death. She told me today that people who interfere with her plans tend to have accidents, and she said it with such cold certainty that I believe she meant it literally. The diary revealed that Adelaide had been systematically intimidating household staff and had successfully driven away 2 previous servants through what Catherine described as psychological warfare. The girl had shown remarkable skill at appearing innocent when adults were watching, while creating an atmosphere of fear when she was alone with her victims. Catherine's final entry, written the night before her death, was particularly chilling. Adelaide informed me today that she knows I plan to leave, and that she cannot allow me to spread lies about her behavior. She said that tomorrow night, when everyone is asleep, she and I will have a conversation about my future. I am genuinely frightened, but I cannot leave the other servants unprotected, and I cannot abandon this child to her own darkness without trying once more to get help. David realized that Catherine Walsh had died trying to protect others from Adelaide, knowing the risk to herself, but unable to abandon her responsibilities. The governess had been a hero who had paid the ultimate price for her courage and compassion. The enhanced analysis of Adelaide's portrait now told the complete story. The blood on her gloves was Catherine Walsh's blood, transferred during their final confrontation on the stairs. The injuries to Adelaide's hand concealed beneath the gloves had occurred when she pushed or struck Catherine, causing the governess to fall to her death on the marble stairs below. The photograph, which had been intended to proclaim Adelaide's innocence to Boston society, had instead preserved evidence of her guilt for more than a century. Adelaide's careful staging and calculated expression couldn't hide the truth from modern investigative techniques, and her attempt to create an alibi through portraiture had backfired completely. David contacted Detective Raymond Kelly from the Boston Police Department's Cold Case Unit, who specialized in historical crimes and pattern analysis. While prosecution was obviously impossible after 120 years, Detective Kelly was fascinated by the case as an example of how modern forensic photography could solve historical mysteries and provide closure for families of long-dead victims. David's discoveries about Adelaide Pemberton's crimes sent shockwaves through Boston's historical and academic communities, transforming what had appeared to be an innocent Victorian portrait into one of the most significant pieces of criminal evidence in the city's archives. The Boston Historical Society organized a groundbreaking exhibition titled Hidden in Plain Sight: Crime and Photography in Early America, with Adelaide's portrait serving as the centerpiece that demonstrated how modern forensic techniques could reveal secrets that had been hidden for over a century. The exhibition drew visitors from across New England, including law enforcement professionals, forensic specialists, and descendants of the families involved in the case. Catherine Walsh's great-niece, Patricia, traveled from New York to see the evidence that finally proved what her family had always suspected: that Catherine's death had not been an accident, but a murder that had been covered up by wealth and social influence. Our family never accepted the official explanation for Catherine's death, Patricia explained to reporters at the exhibition opening. She was young, healthy, and careful, not someone who would simply fall downstairs in the middle of the night. But in 1904, a governess's life wasn't valued the same way as a wealthy family's reputation, so no one listened to our concerns or investigated properly. The enhanced photographs showing the blood evidence on Adelaide's gloves were displayed alongside Catherine's diary entries and the photographer's notes, creating a comprehensive timeline that demonstrated how Adelaide had planned and executed her governess's murder with chilling calculation. The evidence showed that even at age 12, Adelaide had displayed the sophisticated planning abilities and cold manipulation skills typically associated with adult psychopaths. Detective Kelly used the case as a teaching example for modern law enforcement, showing how historical analysis could provide insights into criminal psychology and behavior patterns. Adelaide Pemberton represents an early documented case of juvenile psychopathy, he explained to police academy students. Her ability to manipulate adults, her escalating pattern of violence, and her skill at maintaining a facade of innocence are characteristics we still see in modern cases. David's research revealed that Adelaide had lived to age 86, dying in 1978, after a life that included 2 marriages and several mysterious deaths of family members and associates. Her pattern of violence had continued throughout her adult life, always carefully concealed and explained away as accidents or natural causes. The 1904 portrait had been just the beginning of a lifetime of deception and murder. The photograph now hangs in the Boston Historical Society with a comprehensive placard explaining its significance as both a historical artifact and a piece of criminal evidence. Visitors often stand before it in silence, studying Adelaide's calculated expression and understanding that they are looking into the eyes of a child who had already committed murder and would continue killing for the rest of her life. David published his findings in the Journal of Forensic History, contributing to a growing field that used modern investigative techniques to solve historical crimes and provide closure for families of long-dead victims. Adelaide's case became a landmark example of how careful analysis could reveal truth across more than a century, proving that justice, while delayed, could still be achieved through the persistent pursuit of evidence and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths about the past.